Hey everyone, this season, don't just watch the games, win them with Pez'sPicks.com. Don't take my word for it. Listen to the man himself.
Thank you, Jeff. This is Pez. After years of giving away our picks on Instagram and beating the house, we've launched Pez's Premium Picks, an exclusive data-based picks based on our algorithm that's hit winners for the last 2 years.
Didn't that algorithm get you over 70% picks right in the NFL last year?
That's right, Jeff. Thank you. No gimmicks, just the pick we believe in. We're using the promo code Lock It Up this week on Pez'sPicks.com. After that, we're asking for a small donation to keep beating the house.
That's right. Use the promo code Lock It Up, all one word, for a free week of access at Pez'sPicks.com. That's Pez'sPicks.com. Check it out today.
All right, Duke fans, welcome to 758 episode of the DBR podcast, the Duke Basketball Roundup. Jason Evans here with you. I'm joined by my buddy Donald Wine. Donald, how you doing today? 3:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. We're getting ready. We have a big weekend of football coming up. Got a big basketball stuff happening next week. What you up to today, man?
I'm packing because I'm going on a long road trip. I'm going to Michigan. I'm going to Pennsylvania. I'm going to my high school reunion this weekend. So shout out Detroit Country Day. And then I'm officiating a friend's daughter's wedding next weekend. So just going to be on the road. Don't worry. I will still be on the pod and bringing all my stuff with me, Jason. But Jason, also this weekend, you mentioned the football game. I know we won't get a chance to talk about it on this show, but the ACC huddle, their game day that the ACC network does, is going to be in Durham. Yep. Because it's a big game coming up against the Yellow Jackets on Saturday. So if you're in Durham, be there, be loud for Jason and I, and it's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, Deep Tease will I think we're going to try and hop back on and do a little bit of a preview of that Duke-Georgia Tech game a little later this week. But what we have up for you next is a really great interview. Folks, you're going to want to strap in and listen to this one. We sat down with Evan Miyakawa. He is one of the top college basketball analyst types out there when it comes to advanced metrics and statistics and all that jazz. Basically, a younger version of Ken Pomeroy, I guess you might say. And we just had a fascinating conversation with him about the Duke Blue Devils. He likes Duke a lot, as you will hear. And you'll hear the players that he likes in the Duke team, and there may be some surprises there. Get ready for the name Pat Ngongba to come up a lot in our conversation. Here's that conversation, though. Jason and Donald, the DBR podcast, talking to Evan Miyakawa about college basketball analytics. Evan, let's start with this. Tell us a bit about how you do all this. How's your process maybe different from Ken Pomeroy, for example? Everyone talks about Ken Pom, but I want to hear how you came up with your own rankings and what goes into it.
Sure. So my background is in basically statistics. I have my PhD in statistics from Baylor. I've grown up always a big college basketball fan. I think for the purpose of this podcast, this is actually pretty relevant. I grew up in Indianapolis and was a big Butler fan. Oh, yeah? And the 2011 year when Duke played Butler in Indianapolis, my dad and I were at Hinkle Fieldhouse watching the semifinal game with all of the Butler fans. And then we drove downtown and bought some tickets off of some Michigan State fans who didn't want to go to the final. So I was able to go to that national title game when I was younger. And that was a very core memory for me. And may have established a little bit of Duke hatred, which I've now completely disowned. I'm totally in favor of Duke as a program. I think Jon Scheyer is doing incredible things. But as a fan of the plucky underdog growing up, that was kind of a thing for me. So I ended up always being a college basketball fan, but as I was progressing in my education, I always just kind of wanted to take what I was learning and say, how can I apply this back to college basketball? And so that's how my website was born initially, as just kind of a fun side project I was working on while in grad school. And then I ended up working for a sports analytics company that works with professional NBA teams with their front offices. And so I was doing advanced statistical research in consultation with those teams up until the point when my website had just kind of organically grown to the point where it was being used by so many different coaches as well as people in media and fans that I was able to kind of just go full time into this venture, which I've been doing for about a year and a half now, which has been really, really cool. And so in terms of the site, if you're going to compare it to like a Ken Pom, which his site has been around for well established for 2 decades, and he does such an incredible job and is a lot of the inspiration for why I started. But my website really goes more in depth on the player and lineup evaluation side of things. So I have a metric called Bayesian performance rating, which we'll talk about, which rates every single player in college basketball in terms of the value they bring to their team on the court. And a lot of that does go into the overall team ratings and preseason projections that you'll see. I also have a lot of lineup analysis where I'm measuring how good a certain lineup of players or smaller combinations of players are playing. There's a lot of stuff there, but those are kind of the main distinctive features that kind of set me apart.
Just really quick. Are you using the same kind of efficiency sort of metrics that Pomeroy and others use?
Yeah, efficiency, measuring it on a per possession efficiency is the best, most accurate way kind of in our modern basketball analytics time that we're in right now to kind of measure player and team performance in a way that's not biased towards certain things like tempo, how fast or slow you play, and different things like that. And so a lot of it is yes, based on that per possession efficiency. At the team level, all the team ratings are basically predicting going forward how efficient on a per possession basis is a team going to be on offense and defense. On the player side of things, it's the same thing. When this player is on the court, how well is their team predicted to perform on offense and defense on a per possession basis in terms of those efficiencies? That's kind of how everything is measured on my site.
We obviously deal a lot with analytics and metrics on this particular show. We talk about Ken Pom all the time. We reference you and Bart Turvik. And we've asked Ken Pom this. I'll ask you this. How difficult is it to create these ratings with so much movement in college basketball in the summer via the portal? The fact that not a single team has dribbled a basketball in a regulation game. It's one thing to have the eye test, but how does that translate to analytics that can't be compiled yet?
Oh, it's certainly difficult. And I think especially when you're doing it in the preseason when you don't have any data points whatsoever for the current season. I know when I post preseason rankings, someone will be like, how can you put this out there? No one's even played a single game. And it's like, well, you're right. There is so much uncertainty about what's going to happen. But that is why I am drawn to college basketball and college basketball data analytics in particular, because it is such a fun exercise to try and quantify these things that we really have no idea about, right? When you have, I think more so than any other major American sport, we have over 350 teams. They all only play about 30, 35 games. So that's maybe playing a tenth of the total possible teams you could play. You have all of this roster turnover, more so now this year than ever before. No one really knows, like, just off the top of their head, who's really going to be the best and not be the best. We absolutely need data-driven, objective tools like what I build. And so, yeah, is it going to be slightly inaccurate? And for a lot of cases, yes, but it's absolutely the best that we have and an essential tool to kind of ground what we think is going to happen as kind of basketball fans and experts in what's kind of going on, because it's impossible for any one person to just have such a high level of knowledge across all of Division I in order to properly contextualize all this stuff. So it's very hard, but it's a wonderful challenge, and I absolutely love it.
So one thing I wonder, let's get to Duke for a moment. We are, of course, the Duke Basketball Roundup. You've got Duke as your number 3 team in all the land, just behind Houston and Purdue. Actually a fair bit ahead of Florida in the number 4 spot, in terms of the overall relative ranking. And you seem to like Duke's offense a lot more than their defense. Now, both offense and defense I believe, are top 10 for Duke, but you really like the Duke offense. Talk me through a little bit of what went into your thought and putting together these rankings for a team that, frankly, lost almost all its production from last year and brings in highly touted freshmen and guys who had complementary roles a year ago, but who very much seem capable of stepping into much, much bigger roles this year.
I'm very excited about this Duke team. I think in general, my evaluation of them as a team is going to be a bit more optimistic than where you'll see them. I think in the AP poll, which just came out, Duke is 6th, and I have them several spots higher than that. I think that kind of has been a trend as I've seen across a lot of the different human rankings that I've seen. And part of why I really like this Duke team is, yes, they absolutely lost a ton of talent, obviously, from last year's historically talented team in terms of the freshmen that they had and the other talent. But not only do I think they are still bringing in at least one very notable freshman in Cameron Boozer, who's going to be one of the best players in the country, I believe. But I also think the returning pieces they've brought back specifically in Patrick Ngongba, Maliq Brown, and Isaiah Evans, I think all three of those guys are huge, absolutely critical for a team like Duke to be returning them. And I think offensively in particular, what we saw in limited flashes from guys like Big Pat and from Isaiah Evans, obviously they weren't needed to be starters or even heavy rotation players last year, but they were very, very good in limited minutes, both in terms of their individual statistical efficiencies that they had and in terms of their impact on overall team performance. There was a lot there that was very encouraging. And when you throw that in with their pedigree coming out of high school and the fact that they're going to be in a much, much bigger role in year two, my model predicts really, really big improvement for them. And I think especially offensively, when you look at a guy like Isaiah Evans, his offensive rating, he's the top projected offensive player in the ACC this year in my preseason metrics. And he's 6th overall nationally amongst all Division I. He's 6th best in terms of his preseason offensive BPR, which is my measurement for offensive production, basically. So I think he's going to be really, really big. I think him in particular is being kind of overlooked in a lot of the preseason hype around this Duke team. And when you look at national player rankings in general, I think he's going to be great. So I think a lot of those factors go into their offense being great. Their defense obviously is a step below that, but still being 6th best in the country is very good. So it's not really like it's going to be a weak point for them.
We like everything at number 1, so we're going to count it as a weak point until results change. But I digress. I think the one thing that I want to ask about this is as the season goes along, and obviously we can't predict what the season is going to how it's going to happen. But what do you think Duke will be at the end of the season? And do your metrics factor in younger teams, especially teams like us that have a lot of freshmen, improving over time? You talked about the upperclassmen and their projected improvement, but you have stats to back it up. What about the freshmen? Does that help as the season goes along?
Yeah, so in terms of projecting freshmen, basically what I do is I look at every single player and kind of their recruiting profile coming out of high school, and then I basically look at other players who had similar profiles in the last 10 or 15 years and how they actually performed in their freshman season and the value that they brought kind of in their first year in college, and that sort of forms the projection for those players for this year. So, you know, a guy like
we're about to hear the name Paulo Banchero, I bet.
Well, yeah, guys like Paulo Banchero and Cooper Flagg obviously came in with really, really high projections because not only were they at the very top of their class coming in, but also just the hype and potential and NBA stock that they had was just at a really, really high. And so they started really high. They finished really high. Cooper Flagg was the number 1 player. I think Banchero finished as a, top 3 or 5 player his year at least. I don't remember the exact number. I'd have to go look it up. But you look at, Cameron Boozer, and I have him ranked as a top 10 player coming in this year. Now that's a step below where I had Flagg in the preseason last year. I think I had Flagg 4th or 5th in the preseason, but top 10 as a freshman is pretty hard to do. And so he is a part of, a trio of freshmen coming in with him and Darren Peterson and AJ DeBanza, who are all just really, really talented and I think are all going to be great players. But when you kind of combine all of that, there is a lot of variance and volatility that goes into that freshman projection. And so Boozer could end up being a lot better than 9th best player or a lot worse. There's a lot more kind of margin for error with that prediction. But when you kind of put all that stuff together, my preseason ratings are basically predicting this is how well I think this team is going to do over the full course of the season. So if I'm predicting where I think Duke is going to finish this year, I think they are going to finish as the 3rd best team in the country in terms of how confident I am with them. That's basically how this works. And so that's pretty much where I would slot them. And so I think the goal for this team should be a 1 seed, if not a 2 seed, and looking really strong going into the tournament.
All right, so I want to talk about a different player. You briefly mentioned Patrick Ngongba. You've got him as the number 30 player in the country, the 2nd best player in the Duke team, at a level where he would be a first-team All-ACC player. Where's that coming from? You're just getting that from, what is it your metrics love about him? You're getting that from limited time last year, translating into bigger numbers over bigger time this year?
Yeah, obviously the lack of sample size, makes it a little bit more of a question mark with him last year than, a guy who played a lot more minutes. But from the limited sample size that we had, and when you combine that with his high school recruiting ranking coming out of high school that really points to the potential that he has yet to reach, there was just so much that I really liked on a per possession basis about what he brought that I think is going to translate as he steps into a much bigger role this year. When you look at the things that he does well as a big man, I have player skill grades for every single player in Division I that basically looks at projecting how they're going to be going forward in all of these different statistical categories: scoring, rebounding, assists, turnovers, all that stuff. And Patrick Ngongba has an A- grade, which is very good, 94th percentile in both rebounding and playmaking. Now, a playmaking grade kind of combines both assists and turnovers. Now, he's obviously not a huge assist machine, but it is very rare for a big guy to have as low of a turnover rate as he had last year. His projected turnover rate for this season is under 2%. That's 90th percentile in the country. And it's very, very rare for a guy to be able to pass the ball as much as he was able to do last year while barely turning the ball over at all. And so when you talk about the fact that he is an able scorer, he's really dominant on the glass, and then you're going to be able to give the ball to him and he's going to be able to make chances for himself or set up teammates without turning the ball over, that's a massive, massive deal and a very valued thing in a big man. I really think his only issue that could prevent him from having a bigger season is fouling. Just the amount of minutes that he's able to play overall, that was an issue that we saw a little bit last year in terms of his per possession numbers for amount of fouls that he's picking up. But if he's able to correct that, and that's not something that's going to limit his minutes, I just think he's going to be very, very good this year.
So another player that we have that's kind of in that higher range is your third highest rated Duke player is Maliq Brown. And he's presumed to be the backup to Patrick Ngongba at center, but you have him as a top 50 player in the country. Your ratings must really like defense if we're talking about Maliq Brown being one of the 50 best players in America.
Yeah, something that you're going to see that I think is a very valuable about my player metric, Bayesian performance rating, is that it really does try and quantify the defensive end in terms of the value or impact that a player has just as much as the offensive end. There's a lot that you can use there. There's obviously some of the individual statistical contribution on the defensive end, like blocks, steals, rebounds, etc. But also a lot of it just comes down to when you're on the court, are you having a positive or negative impact on how your team is performing defensively overall? And when you look at a guy like Maliq Brown last year, he finished the year as the second best defender in the ACC behind Cooper Flagg. And when you looked at specifically how Duke just performed as a defense with each player on the court, he led the team in this metric I have called adjusted team defensive efficiency at 80 points per 100 possessions, which basically means Duke was at its best when Maliq Brown was on the floor defensively last year. And that really does carry a lot of weight. I expect that to continue. They're going to obviously use him in a lot of the same ways they did last year. So even though he's projected to maybe not be a starter, I still think he's going to play some very, very valuable minutes. And when you look at just on a per possession basis, when you're on the floor, how valuable are you to the team? I think he's going to be really crucial for Duke this year.
I'm just going to mention real quick that you mentioned two guys who did not win ACC Defensive Player of the Year last year. I think we agree with you. I'm just pointing that out there for reasons unknown.
We want to ask you a little bit about, the fluctuation that happens in your rankings, because, it's all guessing at this point. There's no data, as we've discussed, no data yet. So how much do the ratings tend to shift over the first few weeks of the season? Are they super volatile, or do you say, you know what, the things that I expected, I still think will happen, and you sort of gradually phase out the expectations over time?
More often than not, they end up being pretty close to how teams perform. There can be a lot of fluctuation during the season, but in general, if you're looking at my preseason top 10, you're going to have 6 or 7 of those teams in the top 10 by the end of the season. That's just kind of how it works. There's a lot of really helpful data that
Duke's number 3. We don't need to play the games. We're good.
Yeah, exactly.
We want to be one, Jason. We got to get those last two.
Yeah.
Yeah, 3's not good enough. So in general, obviously there can be teams that are end up being much better and much worse. That happens every single year. But when you look at all of the teams in general, they typically tend to be pretty close to, by the end of the season even, where pretty close to where they started the season. And I think that just shows that, yes, we haven't played any games, and there's a lot of stuff that can happen that we can't predict, injuries or, player development and things like that. But by and large, especially at a team level, when you combine all the individual player projections and our knowledge about coaching and all of that, it typically does a pretty decent job of saying, here's roughly what to expect from the season for this team. And so I think in terms of factors that can lead to the most change from the preseason, I do think it is a lot of players who individually have a much higher ceiling and lower floor in terms of how they could perform. The freshmen are obviously a big one. So when you have a team that has a more reliant on 5-star freshmen like Duke, for example, certainly Duke last year, no question, there was just a lot more uncertainty about, are these kids really going to, reach the potential we know they have, or are they going to kind of flame out? And so a team like Duke last year had a bit of a higher range of outcomes. I think I had Duke, probably second or third in the preseason last year. They obviously turned out to be, on the course of the season, the best team in college basketball. But if you were to flip that coin again, it's possible they would have been the 10th or 15th best team, just based on how much you're relying on players who haven't played a minute of Division I basketball. So that's certainly one there. But I also think, too, looking at players who are transfers, teams that have a lot of transfers, there's just a lot less known about how those players are going to fit in that new system. So that can lead to a lot of volatility there as well. So those are some of the factors that often lead to a little bit more question marks. But in general, a lot of these predictions in the preseason tend to be fairly accurate by the end of the year.
Evan, you mentioned some of the uncertainty that you kind of have to battle from year to year, and some of that is known, right? Volatility with regards to the transfer portal, things like that. Is there a specific thing this particular year that surprised you that you kind of had to take into account a little bit more or a little bit less based on the, gestures at everything college basketball?
Well, the main thing that was a really, really big wrinkle this year and is going to continue to be going forward is the influx of international talent that we had from Europe. A lot of teams, got a lot of really talented players from Europe. I think coming into last season, there were maybe 3 or 4 notable players in the high major level who are international players. And this year we have maybe 50 or 75. It's just been an absolute insane jump. And so I've had to figure out how to account for all those players. I don't think my system is as accurate as it could be yet. I have some plans to make it a lot more kind of robust from a statistical perspective going forward. But in general, I basically have to look at, okay, here are roughly how these players all rank in terms of how all of these experts view them coming into college. And then here's how players with kind of that level of pedigree coming into college have performed in previous years. And that forms a rough baseline for those players. With that being said, I think a lot of those predictions are going to be pretty far off from how those players play, just because it's still relatively unknown exactly how the value that these international guys are going to bring. Some of them are going to be awesome, and some of them are going to be major flops, and we just really don't know who. So I think that's definitely a factor. I think when you look at overall trends from my rankings, the disparity between kind of the high major conferences and teams and everything outside of that seems bigger than ever. I think the best ranked like true mid major I have is San Francisco at 53rd. So there's like no true mid majors ranked in the top 50 this year, which that's
kind of amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And so, even going back 5 years ago, you would expect to have 4 or 5 really solid teams
like
coming from some of those
Memphis,
conferences.
no San Diego State. I mean, I'm thinking of the schools that,
Gonzaga.
Well, so I'm talking about programs that are kind of, I'm not including Gonzaga. I'm not including St. Mary's. San Diego State I have ranked 41st, but I think these teams have kind of established themselves as kind of borderline high majors. Right. I'm talking about teams from outside of these Power 5 leagues in college basketball who are, really true mid majors that they haven't made Final Fours and things like that. And
I got you.
5 years ago, we would have had a lot more of these teams ranked higher, and we just don't this year.
Real quick, Evan, you mentioned the international player and the influx of players. How do you treat them in your ranking? Do you treat them as freshmen, or because a lot of these guys have stats from elsewhere, do you kind of treat them as a returning player? How does that work?
I more or less treat them as freshmen because we don't have any stats of them playing in college basketball. Now, some of how their projection is formed is based on their stats from Europe. But in terms of the level of uncertainty that I attach to their rating and how much they're able to how much weight I give to that preseason projection, I attach a lot of uncertainty to those, similar to how I would with freshmen.
All right, Evan, we're about to wrap things up. Appreciate your time, but I want to ask you one last thing before we go. Duke, obviously, for years was Coach K's team. We are now in year 4 of the Jon Scheyer era. It has been very good for Duke fans so far, even though we don't have a national title yet. That's coming very soon, though. Talk to me a little bit about how you consider coaches and what you think of, you're a guy who looks at the entire scope of college basketball. What do you think of the job Jon Scheyer's done in his first 3+ years now assembling the team and the such? He's a guy who embraces analytics, by the way. If he hasn't called you already, he's probably going to call you soon.
Well, I asked him a question at one of the Final Four press conferences about something unrelated to anything I do, and he mentioned back that he said that Duke was one of the best teams in the country last year at kill shots, which is one of these metrics that I track on my site that measures how many 10-0 runs a team goes on. So he more or less shouted me out there, which was pretty cool. So in general, I think, if I were to put coaching into two big buckets, it's how good are you at building a roster, and how good are you at getting your roster to outperform how good they should be over the course of the season. And I think the recruitment side of things is more muggy than ever because there's a lot more factors than just your head coach that go into recruiting these days. NIL money obviously being the biggest. Oh, yeah. So how much you can attach that to Jon Scheyer specifically, people could debate that. But in terms of, okay, based on what you have, how good have you done? I think Jon Scheyer has been excellent in his time at Duke so far. Obviously, them coming up short last year was disappointing, but on the course of the year, there is so much randomness that can happen in a tournament. How dominant they were last year getting to a Final Four. I think not that you should be content with that, but I don't think that should be a ding on Jon Scheyer whatsoever that they weren't able to go all the way. And I think the track record across his season so far has been very encouraging. He's not really had any disappointing seasons by and large based on what he's had to work with. I think he's been great. I think he's been instituted things very quickly. And you look at how Duke has performed as in a major coaching change over the last 3 years compared to, say, North Carolina with also a recent coaching change. There is a massive gap right now in terms of how those programs are viewed. And you can attribute a lot of that to Jon Scheyer because he has kept things chugging along like they're supposed to at Duke.
Evan, you have just, been singing our song. Duke fans are going to love what you just had to say. The rival with Carolina never dies. But yeah, Evan Miyakawa, we are so appreciative of you spending time with us today, giving us some insight into one of the most widely watched and interesting analytical sites out there. Folks, if you don't know, evanmia.com is where you can find all the data that we've been talking about here. Thanks a lot, man. We hope to have you back on sometime soon.
Yeah, this was great. Thank you guys so much.
The holidays sneak up fast, but it's not too early to get your shopping done and actually have fun with it. Uncommon Goods makes holiday shopping stress-free and joyful, with thousands of one-of-a-kind gifts that you can't find anywhere else. Uncommon Goods looks for products that are high quality, unique, and often handmade or made in the United States. Many are crafted by independent artists and small businesses, and because they're made in small batches, the best finds can sell out fast. I know I've enjoyed the acupuncture mat that I got from Uncommon Goods and cannot wait to try out the acupressure recovery socks that are meant to bring me relief after travel or a long day on my feet. They're two things that I didn't think that I'd need that are going to become a big part of my daily life. And with every purchase you make at Uncommon Goods, they give back $1 to a nonprofit partner of your choice. They have donated more than $3 million to date, which is pretty awesome. So shop early, have fun, and cross some names off your list today. To get 15% off your next gift, go to uncommongoods.com/DukeBB. That's uncommongoods.com/DukeBB for 15% off. Don't miss out on this limited time offer. Uncommon Goods, we're all out of the ordinary.
From the break, and again, our thanks to Evan Miyakawa for that fascinating conversation. Again, folks, you can get a lot of his data from his website, evanmia.com, EVANMIYA.com. That's how it's super easy to type that in and find out a lot of the stuff he had. Don, what to you was the most surprising thing in that conversation?
I think, first of all, we talk about him all the time on the show. I know we usually utilize Ken Palm the most, but between him, Evan and Bart Torvik. You hear a lot of those names
Yeah.
on this pod because we reference a lot of it, and they have some great stuff. I think the one thing, first of all, I obviously love that he loves Duke, and I think the one thing that I always look for is how these things fluctuate. So his answer about what factors might attribute to a fluctuation in rankings, or also just his thought process on how he analyzes a team before they hit the court. I think that's fascinating stuff because if as we're about to get into, when you look at all these different websites, Duke is very commonly, around the same type of space, right? Between 3 and 7, essentially. But some of these teams are very well off. You may have some that are in the 60s and then in the 40s at another site. So I like how he explains what brings his metrics to a certain level, and what he kind of finds in them and what strengths, namely defense, that are accentuated and may bring a player up. And I love the fact that he loves Maliq Brown in his rankings because of the fact that his defense is that good. And like I said, you and I, and I'm sure everybody out there agrees, with short of Cooper Flagg, he was the most dangerous defensive player in the ACC last year and one of the best defensive players in the country.
Actually, the interesting thing about Maliq Brown's ranking, if you go ahead and look on Evan's site, is that Maliq actually isn't that bad an offensive player. It's that he doesn't do a lot. Like, he's very efficient. He does the little things. He doesn't make mistakes, doesn't commit turnovers and the such. Obviously, Maliq is a really, really good passer. And so as a result, like, as good as he is on defense, one of the reasons he's so highly ranked on Evan's site is because Maliq is also a fairly decent offensive player. I'm just fascinated in how highly he regarded Patrick Ngongba and Isaiah Evans on offense. Isaiah Evans is one of the top 6 offensive players in the country. It's like, that's eye-popping. That's how much the analytics folks out there really love the 3-point shot and how good Isaiah is at shooting threes.
I also just like the fact that, Jason, we get to talk about these rankings. They're out like over the course of, what was it, like 2 or 3 days. We got him, Ken Palm, the AP pay. That means we're getting close, and now we can start really diving into some of these numbers, some of these analytics, and kind of seeing, okay, what is it about Duke, especially because we're a Duke podcast? What about Duke do people like? What about Duke do they think are going to be some of the weak spots? And obviously, we still haven't dribbled a basketball in anger against another team yet, but that's coming very soon. This is the first step of that process. We had countdown, now we have the rankings, and now in a week, Jason, we're going to be talking about actual basketball in a preseason level. So I'm really looking forward to this, and really looking forward to even further exploring Evan's rankings and how they may project how Duke does in the season.
Yeah, and speaking of rankings, let's get into it a little bit because we got the AP poll. Everybody has pretty much put out their rankings at this point. Duke comes in at 6th in the AP poll in the human rankings. By the way, Duke was 10th in ESPN, 5th in the field of 68. CBS has Duke 9th. The Athletic has Duke 8th. And then the folks who just do straight computer kind of numbers, Ken Pomeroy has Duke number 7. We mentioned that we just spoke to Evan Miyakawa, who has Duke 3rd. And then the highest ranking out there, Bart Torvik, has the Blue Devils as the number 2 team in the country. Consensus seems to be, whether you are a human using the eye test or whether you are a advanced analytics guy using the number test, is that Duke is a top 10 team, probably right around the middle of the top 10, although the analytics guys like us a little bit more than the human eye test.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, right? Because from the eye test, you have a bunch of people who left last year. You mentioned with Evan the production that left last year or graduated. And while we know about the freshmen coming in, that's still an unknown as to how they may be factoring into the rotation, how good Cameron Boozer is. I know a lot of that was taken into account with some of these rankings, how some of these other freshmen may come along. And as Evan mentioned, the improvement of some of the sophomores that did come back. Because if you recall, a year ago, we didn't have a lot of guys in that top rotation that came back, or guys that had production that you could, put into a computer and spit out numbers. We do now. We have at least 5 guys, right, that came back that factor in to this rotation 1 through 10. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that translates. But I think also, Jason, the one thing that maybe people are slotting in on the eye test is this murderer's row of a non-conference schedule that we have, right? A lot of people probably think that we're going to take some hits in this non-conference schedule because we're facing the number 3, number 7, number 10. We're facing number 11 twice this year. We're facing number 19, number 22, number 25 twice. And Jason, we got number 18 in the preseason in Tennessee. So I feel like a lot of people, especially in the eye test, they factor that quite a bit when it comes to figuring out how all this comes out. And of course, everybody's going to be wrong because there's going to be some surprise. There's going to be some team that pops up in the first couple of weeks. There's going to be some team that takes a hit in the first couple of weeks. You're just hoping it's not your team.
Yeah, exactly. I just want to quickly touch on a couple of other ACC teams because those are the teams that Duke will be playing the most. Louisville checks in pretty similarly to Duke. I mean, there are even some rankings. ESPN has Louisville number 6 and Duke number 10. The Athletic has Duke 8 and Louisville 6. So there's some rankings out there that are predicting that Louisville will actually be better than Duke this year in the rankings. But basically, you can find the Louisville Cardinals somewhere in the middle of the top 10 all the way to, there are a couple rankings that have them around 14. Evan Miyakawa actually has Louisville at number 17. He's lower on Louisville than just about anybody else. But the Cardinals are going to be very, very good in these preseason rankings. And then the other ACC team that shows up in almost everyone's top 25 is the North Carolina Tar Heels, although they are at the very, very back end. I think the highest I saw anybody had them was Bart Torvik has Carolina at 18. There are a couple other folks who have them around 20, but then most folks have Carolina like right at number 25. NC State is also in some folks' rankings. ESPN has NC State at number 24, and Field of 68 has NC State at number 20. Those are the consensus seems to be those 4 teams are the class of the ACC, and then just outside the top 25 is when you start getting to people who are saying good things about Virginia and a couple other ACC clubs. We also got a women's poll, didn't we?
Yeah, but real quick on the ACC poll,
Yeah.
I think the other thing about the ACC is if you look at Bart Torvik, if you look at Evan Miyakawa, and you look at the AP poll, the ACC is trending up and I know last year there's really nowhere to go but up. But
Yeah.
the bottom half of the ACC is much higher on average than they were at this point last year. Now, they got to play the games. And these non-conference schedule is really going to determine, Jason, as we saw last year, whether the ACC gets 4 to 5 teams or whether they get 6 to 7. It doesn't feel like much, but that ACC SEC challenge, huge. We can't get ran like we did last year. These other non-conference big tests that we have, and it's not just Duke. It's the other big teams where they have big games. They got to perform in them, especially against other Power 4 conferences. Because if they do, the stature of the ACC levels up. And hey, a win, by Duke over Texas might not seem like a great big deal for the rest of the ACC on November 4th, but on that first Sunday or that second Sunday in March, when they're determining who's going to go in, they're going to say, hey, these ACC teams against these SEC teams did X well. Let's put this ACC team in on the bubble over an SEC team. So that's where you have to kind of figure out that these teams are trending higher, but they got to play higher, to play at a much higher level than they did last year.
Yeah, by the way, I jumped ahead with the women's poll. We're going to get to that in 1 second. But the one follow I have to what you said is, yes, obviously you want the ACC to get wins against other power conference teams. I'll say the other thing that has really hurt the ACC in recent years, bad losses. Losses to teams that an ACC team has no business losing to. And all it takes is 1 or 2 of those, and then everyone goes, this conference is still crap. And we need
it takes like, we could beat everybody in the Power 4 conferences, and then there's that one loss to the Citadel, for example, and then they go, oh, see, it's always about your last game, right? And they always think about that last loss.
Yeah, exactly. So most of the projections I'm seeing, and look, bracketology, as silly as the preseason rankings are that we're talking about right now, bracketology is even more silly. Most of the bracketologists are looking at probably 5, 6, maybe 7 teams from the ACC, but certainly more than a year ago when we barely got 4 teams into the dance. And that's good because it's more quality win opportunities for the Duke Blue Devils. All right, let's get to the women's poll now. You wanted to mention that.
Yeah, and of course, Duke is one of two teams, the other being UConn, that has both a men's and women's team in the top 10. Duke on the women's side comes in at number 7. And Jason, just like the men, the loaded schedule that they have is going to be incredible. Yeah, of course, they're going to face number 2 South Carolina. They're going to face number 3 UCLA or number 4 Texas. All that's coming in Vegas. They're facing LSU, who is number 5. They're facing NC State. UNC, Notre Dame. There's so many Louisville. There's so many teams that this Duke women's team is facing, and Kara Lawson, who, as we talked about a couple weeks ago, was just named the USA basketball coach for 2028. This is another step of this. Now, people are going to want to come at us a little bit more. It's going to help in a lot of areas that she's USA basketball's head coach, but I think the one thing is the stature level of Duke is going to start to take a rise this year, and I think the trending upward that this team has done, the fact that we've gotten one step further every single year, just to an Elite Eight appearance last year, and by God, we were very close. We were in it for 90% of the game, with a chance to go to the Final Four and have 2 teams in the Final Four. This year is the next part of that process. We're having a loaded schedule. It's about facing the teams that you need to beat to get to a Final Four, and so we're going to get that test during the regular season. I love it. And I love that they are rated so high. They just got another recruit the other day, a top 15 recruit in the ESPN poll. So things are looking upward for both of our basketball programs. And you ain't got to tell us. We're going to be watching all these games really focused on seeing how this team continues. And if we stay injury free, which is always a knock on wood situation, if we can stay injury free, this team is going to be very special to watch, this women's team.
I will freely admit I have not done the research on this, and I feel terrible. I probably should have, but it feels to me like the Duke women under Kara Lawson almost always are better at the end of the year than the preseason predictions. I know that's happened the past few years at least. Well, here we are, preseason number 7 in the AP poll. All right, Kara, if you're going to outperform number 7, that's really impressive. I'm looking forward.
We got expectations now, which is great. I mean, before we were kind of flying under the radar, no more. I think that's the big test for this team, is what happens when the target is on their back and instead of them going after the other people with targets.
Exactly. All right, with that, I'm going to wrap it up here on episode 758 of the Duke Basketball Roundup. Jason and Donald, we want to thank again our guest, Evan Miyakawa. By the way, Miyakawa, not Miyakawa. There are people who pronounce his name wrong. Frankly, I've done it for years, but he told us the right way to say it. Go check out his website. You're going to find tons of fascinating statistical stuff there. We'll be back at you very, very soon to preview a huge ACC football game, Duke versus Georgia Tech. Until then, here's the Duke band to play us out and take us home. What is that background, man?
These are all coffee bags.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I'm a big coffee guy. Collect bags from roasters across the country, and when I'm done with them, I put them up on my wall.
Whole bean or ground?
Whole bean, man. Not using any of that nonsense.
There we go. I had the whole bean for a while. I'm a very new, I would say maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, a new coffee drinker. So
all right, there you go. No coffee at all before then at all, or just getting into it more than before?
Not a drop until I was 40.
Wow, interesting.
How much coffee do you drink per day?
Who are you asking?
You, Evan.
So I don't have a huge caffeine tolerance. So I typically just have 1 cup of coffee a day, but I just make it really, really good. I have a whole coffee making setup and whatnot. So I don't drink lots of coffee, but every cup it's very good.
I like it.
I like it. One a day, yep. And I'm if it's after 10:30, can't do it.
Interesting.
Before 10:30, I'm good.
I'm the opposite. So. If I do it too early in the morning, I'm too jittery the rest of the day. So I do mine after lunch. It's kind of an afternoon pick me up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to do it in the morning. If I have coffee or any caffeine after about 3 or 4 o'clock, then I won't fall asleep till tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair.
All right, Evan, we will get this started. Hey, this is going to seem like a silly question. Pronounce your last name.
This is not a silly question at all. It is Evan Miyakawa.
Miyakawa.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure.
Yep.
Even though everyone calls you Evan Maya. Everyone's
Well, that's the thing. I have people, they'll read my full last name and they'll pronounce it correctly, and then they'll say the short version and they'll say Evan Maya. It's like, how to... It's pretty funny.